Hi, good morning, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. The title of our session today is going to be Fraud at the Speed of Payments and Can Your Organization Keep Up? And over the next 45 minutes, we'll be looking at where fraud is heading, how regulation is responding, and what AI brings to both sides of that equation. My name is João Rijo Courinho. I'm a global product manager for fraud management at Worldline, and I'll be hosting today's session and taking us through the first part on fraud trends. I will also be joined by two of my colleagues, Vincent Sigliano. He directs our public and regulatory affairs work, and Tessa Dziel, who leads our fraud analytics team. So let's start by looking at our agenda for today. So we've structured today's session into three parts. The first one, I'll start where the fraud landscape is today, the trends that we're seeing, and the shift on how fraud works and what this means for European banks and PSPs. Then Vincent will then take us into the regulatory response that we are seeing, specifically looking into PSR and PSD3 and the redrawing of the liability map and how that will affect European Union's PSPs. And lastly, we'll have also Tessa, and Tessa will close with the AI dimension, meaning how can banks use AI to defend themselves more effectively. We will keep each one of the sessions for in around 10 minutes duration, and at the end, this will leave us for 15 minutes to answer to your questions that you can post by using the Q&A function, and we will then answer at the end of the presentation. A quick note here, your microphones will be muted throughout the session, but this Q&A section will allow you to ask whatever questions you want. Along the way, we will also run two live polls, so please stay engaged, and the more you participate, the richer the session will be. So let's start first with the landscape. To start, I want you to keep in mind four numbers that I think will set the stage for this presentation. The first one is that 442 billion has been lost to scams globally. This comes from Gaza's report, the Global Anti-Scam Alliance of 2025. This is scam specifically, not fraud in general. And so we are speaking about a victim that has been manipulated into authorizing a payment themselves. Then the second one is that 80% of phishing and social engineering is now powered by AI. This means that the entry barrier for running a very sophisticated scam has dropped dramatically due to this aid of AI. The third one is that 76%, and this is focused on the report of the EBA and ECB from last December, that 76% of credit transfer fraud, one of the payment instruments most used by scammers, is caused by payer manipulation. And the last one, which will also be very relevant to what we'll be discussing today, is that 85% of credit transfer losses are now borne by the PSU or the end user. This will go through 72% to 100% depending on the country that we're looking at in the European Union. Next, let's maybe look at what was yesterday's fraud, if we may call it like that, not that it has disappeared completely, and what is today's fraud. So yesterday's fraud was more technical. Attackers went after the system. They looked at, they tried to steal credit cards or debit cards. They used card not present fraud. They had untrusted devices, unusual locations, and the fraudster himself would initiate the payment. Today, there is a significant change. So today is more about manipulation and the emotional triggers that each one of us has, and how they can be used in order to lead the victims to initiate the payment themselves, and doing so using their own device and their own app and doing the authentication. Maybe now let's look at the specific use case so that we can illustrate better what I'm talking about here. So let's look at this use case of Sarah. So Sarah is the mother of two, 42 years old. She lives in Lyon and has been a bank customer of her bank for 12 years now. So we can look at her as a low risk client, a low risk PSU with no fraud history. One day she will receive, or she can receive, a call identifying her as her own bank, meaning the caller ID has been spoofed. The number that's being shown it matches the name of her bank, but the caller himself is a fraudster. Here is where the manipulation starts. So the trust that Sarah has in receiving a contact or through the channel of her bank is already aiding the fraudster or the scammer to hit his mark, or to hit his victim. And he will start with a very calm opening dialogue, saying that the account is being drained, they are from the fraud department, something like around those lines, and that Sarah needs to act urgently in order to safeguard her money. What she will do then is follow the instructions of the scammer. She will go into her own app, she will use her own device, and she will do whatever authentication may be required from her bank, an OTP, biometric, and she will transfer the money to the IBAN that the fraudster gives her. This, in around maybe 6 minutes that we're talking about, Sarah will lose 8,400 euros. While this that I've just mentioned is a theoretical case, we can understand and try to understand how this has been tried to be tackled in other countries. One of them would be the UK experience, and how the UK has tried to stop, or at least try to shift the liability from the end user to the PSPs in these kinds of manipulation. What does this mean? This means that even though in a different scope, since October 2024, the UK has introduced a mandatory reimbursement scheme for authorized push payment. The legal architecture is different from what we see in the PSR and the PSD3, but it is on the same category of payer manipulation. Three numbers that I think are worth keeping in mind from the UK experience. So from October 24 to September 25, 88% of the claims of funds due to fraud, to the manipulation or authorized push payment fraud, were reimbursed by UK's PSPs. This means in around 11 months, less than a year, UK PSPs have paid 173 million pounds in a liability split 50-50% between the payer bank and the payee bank. And the last one that I would like also to draw your attention to is the number, or the percentage of rejected reimbursements claims due to gross negligence. This is a very important one, and you will understand when Vincent presents also what we are looking at, the PSR and the PSD3, because while the gross negligence safeguard might look that it can help to stop part of the liability falling onto the PSPs, in practice, what we have seen is that it's the exception and not the norm. At least in this UK experience, that's what we can see. These three numbers, I think, can give us a real-world benchmark of what to expect once the PSR comes into force. Now, before going into the regulation section, I would like to hear from you. And for that, we have a poll that's running right now. And I would ask you to answer the following question. Which type of fraud is putting your organization under the most pressure today? Maybe we can just wait a few seconds to see if we have some answers. If not, we'll just keep the poll running and then we can share these results at the end of our session. So for the sake of timekeeping, now that we've looked at where fraud is and we've seen what it looks like when a customer, for example, a customer like Sarah, like I've shown you, is caught in it, the next question is who pays and under what conditions? That's where the regulation comes in. The PSR and PSD3 that I've mentioned are redrawing this liability, and this will affect between the next 18 to 24 months every PSP in the European Union. Vincent has been tracking this very closely. He has worked with European regulators and industry bodies. And so, Vincent, please take us through this timeline, the key articles, and what this means in practice. The floor is yours, Vincent.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, all. So it is true that now we can tackle the European regulation, also the payment package that is made of a PSD and a PSR. And I will probably go to the next slide. Give me 1 second. Yes. Good. So that's that new regulation that is coming, new regulatory framework. So we have the directive on PSD3, which is also called the PSD2 revision, and that will essentially cover the supervision and licensing aspects on the one hand, and on the other hand, regulations, also so-called PSR, that will notably in a normalized way, specifies the rules for PSPs, TSPs, and the liability rules. When it comes to timing, that has been quite of a marathon, so to say. And on the first line, you can see the high-level timing. So the first proposal of the Commission on that payment package is from 2023. That has followed some public consultations occurring in 2022 with two main objectives: better fighting fraud on the one hand, and especially manage the regulation part, and giving a sense of harmonization across the Union for supervision aspects. So 2023 initial proposal, then we have had the so-called ordinary legislative procedure with the Parliament, with the Council, so the three main European institutions. And we are now in a stage where in 2026, we are waiting for the publication of the final text in the official journal of the EU. Transposition will then occur in 2027 when it comes to the directive. The RTS and the different second-level legislations will also come in 2027 for an applicability, depending on the articles, all over the year 2028. So this is for the middle term, and when it comes to the actual next months, for now, we are in a stage where the texts are already finalized. With still some language and consistency checks that are expected to occur, but the text in their final version, pending this ultimate consistency and language checks, are available. We missed last week the plenary session of May for votes in Parliament, so it should not occur before June or July, meaning that the official journal of the EU publication is only expected now in September or October this year. So that's the high-level timing for an applicability of the different articles, again in 2028. So this is it for the slide on the timing. And when we come to the next slide, some deep dives on the PSR when it comes to the new set of rules for liability. So as mentioned by Joao, one of the new key weak link is no longer the technical strong authentication, but really now is on the payer side, meaning when it comes to fraud, fraudsters are now manipulating the end user so that this person can go through the different SCA processes and then approve a transaction. So this is why the co-legislator has introduced the case of impersonation that occurs notably when a fraudster pretends to be the payer PSP, so usually the banks. And in this case, so the payer will benefit from an additional protection, meaning that it is not enough that the strong customer authentication has been performed by the PSP, so that the transaction is deemed authorized. So the burden will now be on the payer PSP, so in the second column, to have the burden of proof that the payer has either acted fraudulently or at the end there has been some issue that links to the payer, so gross negligence essentially. But in the meantime, the payer PSP has to refund the payer and then bring the evidence that he was not responsible for that fraud. There will be some additional protections. So now on the payer PSP side, so notably to approve some transaction monitorings that will also be applicable on the payee PSP side, so on the acquirer. That's the last part of the slide, whereby both PSPs, so payer PSP and payee PSPs, have to carry out transaction monitoring. Also, through the mandatory participation in so-called fraud data sharing arrangement, the objective is to grant a better participation of the different members of the ecosystem, so that through that cooperation, less fraud can occur. And both payer PSP and payee PSP will be strongly incentivized to do so, to avoid taking the liability. So that would be the new balance of responsibility explained on the PSP side. And if we go to the next slide, we will also see the other elements of liability that actually go beyond the PSP world. So the payer, as we discussed, is more protected than it used to be. So I would say the payer would benefit from that new regulation because at the end, it would be protected against the manipulation. Payer PSP, in the middle of the slide, will have to carry out some solid transaction monitoring, also put in place some impersonation safeguards to avoid being victim himself of the fraudster, but will still keep the primary refund obligation towards the payer. The payee PSP, as we were discussing, will also have to carry out some transaction monitoring and participate to different fraud data sharing agreement. And if it's not able to report that transaction monitoring at transaction level, he will be responsible before the payer PSP. Now, the co-legislator also considered two other kind of entities, so that to have the complete view of the chain. The TSP, so standing for technical service providers, that will also be liable in case of their failure to verify the element of some customer authentication. That liability will nonetheless be capped to the direct financial damage, so it will not exceed the amount of the transaction. First, and on the other side of the chain as well, the social media platforms, the telco operators that will also have to participate to data sharing and financial centers meetings and forums to fight against fraud, and also to remove fraudulent content when it is specified by the PSP. So that responsibility in case of fraud is rebalanced with PSR in the way we just described in that slide. And if we go to the next one, we'll now cover the AI part and how to probably support the ecosystem into fighting fraud. AI providing some modern and efficient tools that Tessa will describe. And Tessa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vincent. So, as we have seen, it's not only these rules and regulations that change a lot. The fraud landscape is continuously changing, and that's why it is really important to continue investing in the infrastructure, operations, and technologies. So, okay, we mentioned several times already that this is changing. Fraudsters are now very often trying to manipulate the user to have the transaction done, because the transactions are more and more secured. So this is the way that the fraudsters found to continue to receive the money. So we have now quite a lot of these fraud, account takeover. We spoke a lot recently about the relay fraud. We see also since quite some time now these push payment scams, where the user is not really fully conscious of subscribing to some recurring transactions. We see fake merchants. So all these approaches from the fraudsters are evolving. They respond really to the different regulations that are put in place. And we see that they start using also AI for these impersonation, for instance. So it means that the way that the fraudsters are doing their activities is changing, but also the frequency that they are renewing the approaches. We see that a lot with these scams or with the fake merchants. They change these on a weekly basis, not to say on a daily basis. So we really need good tools, people also. We need knowledge, technology, capacity to keep performing at the top of our game in this challenging environment. And since a couple of years, we see a huge hype around AI. But actually, at Worldline, we are using already AI for more than 15 years for fraud detection and really in production. But of course, the methodologies and the technologies evolve a lot in AI, and it moves very, very quickly. So the innovation is really at the center of this approach to use AI for fraud detection. So we have started a lot of collaborations with major universities in Europe, and that not only for the love of science, but because each time we can start a proof of concept, checking whether the new technology, the new algorithm, the new methodology could help us reducing the fraud or could benefit to some automation. So we do this proof of concept, and if successful, then we adapt our system, we push really to the next step to have it applied in production. So AI has for sure a lot of advantages, But let's not forget what the rules bring. The rules have also a lot of advantages. If you have identified already a fraud pattern, a rule can be very, very quickly implemented, and it immediately stops this specific fraud pattern. We have also very often in the expert teams, fraud teams, some external knowledge, like knowing from some forums that the fraudsters might be trying new techniques, new MOs, modus operandi. So with rules, you can also anticipate the fraud and prepare some rules that will target the fraud pattern even before the customers are targeted. So this is also one advantage of the rules, and it fully uses the fraud expertise that is often present in such teams, like knowing a bit what the fraudsters will do next if some transactions are declined, then predicting a bit that the fraudsters will move, for instance, to another country. On the other hand, we have AI models that have also really a lot of advantages and that complement really well the rules aspect. For AI models, we see a lot of robustness. So if the fraud pattern evolves slightly, so the fraudster are trying to change a bit the amount, let's say, typically the AI model will recognize that it is the same fraud pattern and will correctly spot it as fraudulent. So this robustness is an important element. We see also that the AI models use extensively all the data that we have at our disposal. It uses all the confirmed fraud and the genuine transactions, so that it is really multiple patterns that can be identified at the same time, where for the rules it is usually much less transactions that are analyzed. AI also use all the available different fields that we have, where typically fraud experts only focus on 5 or 6 relevant fields for the rules. So based on our experience, we see that it's really a combination between the rules and the AI models that brings the best added value or the best performance for our service. And we even tried to push that a bit further, to push this combination further via an auto rule creator. So our auto rule creator is an AI solution that analyzes regularly all the new transactions, genuine and fraudulent, and it extracts the fraudulent pattern and converts these patterns into some rules. The rules are then automatically pushed to production. So this auto rule creator can be scheduled, so we can make it run systematically every day or even multiple times per day if it's needed, depending on how fast we receive the fraud marks. We can also add some parameters, of course, to control what kind of rules will be created, like the false positive, what is the maximum false positive that could be accepted for each rule. But after all that, we have a relevant set of rules that is really fitting very well the new fraudulent transactions that we have received. And this rule set is then automatically pushed to production. This has a lot of advantage because it simplifies a lot this process for the rules maintenance. We also make sure that the new fraud patterns are analyzed and targeted by the rules, so that during the weekends or during holidays, when there are less resources available, we can make sure that the fraud rules are still maintained fully automatically. And then it also frees time for the fraud expert or the rest of the team to work on high value added activities, focusing on some patterns that are more complex, that request really much deeper analysis before they can be provided. So actually we have the combination of three elements. We have the rules, we have the AI models that change also regularly based on the innovations, and we used here the best of the both worlds to create this auto rule creator, mixing AI and rules. Okay, so now I hand over to you, Joao, for the conclusion, and thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Vincent. Great stuff. I think we have a lot of to think about from what you've just mentioned, from the regulation to AI. And maybe, so before we go into the questions you have about the presentation that has been done, maybe let me just leave you with some ideas and takeaways from our session today. So we can say that fraud is now focusing more on the psychological approach and not the technical one. We saw in the use case of Sarah how customers are being manipulated into authorizing their own losses. Also, PSR and PSD3 are adding additional duties in shifting liability to PSPs. We can even maybe estimate that the refund will be first, and then we'll try to recover later. That may happen with the safeguards that exist, or even through technical service providers. And also that the SCA is no longer a proof of authorizing when we're looking at manipulation. AI is fueling fraud, but as we saw, AI can also help PSPs to keep pace with these attacks and that are evolving continuously. And also, lastly, like Tessa just mentioned, rules and AI combine the best of both worlds, where we can use rules for what are the known fraud patterns. We can even build rules using AI, and we can use AI also in real time to monitor and detect fraud in transactions. I think that one key idea would be if you are not fighting fraud that evolves with these with the fraud trends that we are seeing, it will be very hard to keep up if you don't have this evolution also in your organization. So in the next seconds now, we will do a second poll that you will be able to see in the screen. We would like then to also have your participation on this poll, so that we can understand what do you think will help your organization the most in the next 12 months to stay ahead of fraud. If you could participate, would be very interesting. And while we wait for your votes, I can share with you that in the first poll that we had about what type of fraud is putting more pressure on your organization under, the most voted answers were the authorized push payment and impersonation scams that we've just mentioned, and also AI-powered social engineering, meaning, for example, deepfakes and voice cloning, both of them with 27% of the votes in the first poll. For the second one, so we can see that the what you think will help the most of your organization in the next 12 months to stay ahead of fraud will be the preparation the organization will do for PSR and PSD3 compliance. This has been the most voted answer. So maybe now we can look into the Q&A section and see what questions have you asked us. And maybe we can start with the one that we see here. It's about what is the most common mistake you see organizations make when trying to modernize their fraud defenses. So maybe I can take this one, and for this I would say that specifically the most common mistake sometimes is that organizations only focus on the software tool, meaning the organizations are focusing, or the PSPs are focusing on having the latest fraud software tool, fraud platform. But the thing is, no matter how advanced the platform may be, you will always depend on the people who will be operating it, because fraud evolves constantly, weekly, daily, hourly. The scenarios are changing, new scams are appearing, and you need also the right expertise. The organizations need this know-how, this expertise, not only to work the tool, but to know how fraud evolves and how fraud is working today and be updated to those fraud patterns. Mostly this is why in Worldline we have also an approach where we are not just looking to deliver a tool, we are combining the tool with our managed services capabilities in order to be able to provide you with a full business process outsourcing model. Maybe we could go then into another question. Let me check. So we have, from your point of view, what do you expect PSR, PSD3 to be applied uniformly across European Union member states, or will we see national differences we need to anticipate? Maybe here, Vincent, can I ask your expertise here and what's your view on this topic?
Yes. So it will actually depend on the text when it comes to the PSPs, the directive that will cover the authorization and supervision aspects. The answer is yes. There will be some differences in terms of applicability. Rationale behind this, the directive will have to be transposed in each and every national law. So there may be some differences depending on the countries. And the differences may also be in terms of timing. So all transposition will obviously not occur at the same day. When it comes to the PSR, on the contrary, as it is a different legal instrument, so that's a regulation that does not need to be transposed in the national law or adapted into each and every national law. It will be applicable for each and every country like it is specified. For both of them, we are also still waiting for the so-called second and third level legislations. So regulatory technical standards, implementing acts, delegated acts, guidelines coming from either VBA or the European Commission. This text will also be much more precise and assertive, if I may say, in the way to have things harmonized. But for now, they are not issued yet by the authorities.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. If you have any additional questions, I would urge you then to post them so that we can also answer them before the end of our session. I don't see any other questions coming in. Maybe then we'll close this session. I want to thank you for joining. I want also to thank you for your participation in our polls and in the questions asked, and hope you can join us then for a next time. Thank you all.